Welcome to Talking Points. Thank you for joining in today as we delve into part 2 of Hidden Figures. Today we're going to look at a story between three people, a story that entails choices, a story that entails outcomes, and a story that entails wisdom. And so today we're going to learn from these three characters this particular need. All of us need to do this because we're all at some time or another faced with challenges. We're all faced with battles. And so sometimes we have to discern how to win the battle, especially the battle that's right there in front of you. So we're going to look at the story of Abigail, David, and Nabal and try to understand what we can draw from that story that would help us to win the battles that we face in everyday life. So let's go right into the story. Hidden Figures Part 2. Discerning how to win the battle right there in front of you. So this is taken from 1 Samuel chapter 25 verses 2 through 42. Now, I could actually summarize this entire story, but as I was going over it, I think we do a disservice by just summarizing the entire story. I'm going to read these passages, and hopefully as we read them, that we can better see exactly what's being conveyed, exactly what we can extract. Let me say this, and I mentioned this last time we were together. Every time that you read a biblical passage, I don't care if you read the same passage last week, if you read that same passage this week, there's something in the text that you didn't see the last time. And so there's something in this story, no matter what you may have heard before, but there's something in this story that can help us, that can edify us, that can give us the assurance that we need when we're facing battles or conflicts and not know how to respond. So we're going to get right into it. So go on to 1 Samuel chapter 25, beginning at verse 2. But before we do that, let's just go right there now. Let's just go right into it. Beginning at verse 2, it says, "There was a man in Maon whose property was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 3,000 goats. And he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was clever and beautiful, but the man was surly and mean, and he was a Calebite." So we see there, this story is taking place near Carmel. And what's depicted here is a man that was very, very wealthy. 3,000 sheep, 3,000 goats, and he's out there shearing his sheep. And it does give a contrast between Abigail and her husband. Abigail not only had good looks, but she was intelligent. On the other hand, Nabal was surly. And surly describes behavior that's threatening, unfriendly, and irritable. It's the kind of behavior that nobody wants to be around. It is someone who is ill or bad-tempered. So that's how the story is laid out. It gives a contrast between, this man and woman. Abigail, on the other hand, displayed certain qualities that were admirable. Nabal, on the other hand, displayed certain qualities and characteristics that were not favorable at all. Verse 4, "David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, 'Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal. Greet him in my name and thus you shall salute him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. It was a common greeting that we find somewhere in that particular region, and still today, whether it's in Aramaic, whether it's in Hebrew, whether it's in Arabic, there are similar greetings just like this that we can interpret in English that means peace be to you, peace be to your house, and peace to all that you have. And he said, I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm. They missed nothing, and all the time they were in Carmel. Ask the young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your sight, for we've come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. Now, David, he sends a simple message of peace to Nabal and a reasonable request for him and his men. Well, David and his army, they had been out, and they had been protecting Nabal and all that he had, making sure that no robbers would come in, making sure that nothing was happening. And so all David wanted in return was just to, essentially provide a little bit of something. It's about the feast day. It's about time for the feast. Hey, look, remember my young man, and then remember me, your son David. Very reasonable request. We took care of you. We just asking that you just break us off a little bit. Give us something back in return for, our troubles, and my men are weary, and so on and so forth. When David's young men, verse 9, when David's young men came, they said to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and the meat that I have butchered for my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where? Now wait a minute now. Nabal's answer was a little bit of an insult, because he said some things like, who is David? And who is this son of Jesse? And apparently he didn't know who David was, and he didn't know his capability, or he was just kind of edging him, because he said something. There are people that are broken away from their masters. Now, there's a couple ways you can look at it. You can look at it as if he didn't know, which I kind of lean to the fact that he didn't know that this was the David, and there's an army out there of 600 people along with David. I don't think he realized that. On the other hand, he was just, spewing out insults, threatening words, pretty much everything that describes what we learned early on about being surly. So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. David said to his men, every man strap on his sword, and every one of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the luggage. Now, I don't know about you, but I see some trouble coming. Nabal returns with these requests of insult, and now David has made up in his own mind to deal with Nabal, and he tells his men to strap up. I mean, I got a visual of this, that it's about to go down, all because words that were said by Nabal, the insults and the disrespect and the lack of acknowledgement of what this army of men have done. So the egos are now stirring. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he shouted insults at him. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm. We never missed anything when we were in the fields, as long as we were with them. They were a wall to us, both night and day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do. For evil has been decided against our master and all of his house. He is so ill-natured that no one can speak to him. I'm sure we all know people that are like that, are just ill-natured, that you just can't talk to them because they always, they just, just upset you. You just can't get through to them. Well, this was Nabal. We see that trouble is stirring. And Abigail, you've got to do something. It's amazing how that sometimes, that God always has people in the cuff to protect us. He always has somebody that will keep us in check. And it's important to have people that we're accountable to. It's important to have people that are not afraid to tell you the truth. Because some people, especially leaders, kind of sometimes puts out the kind of air that their subordinates and the people that they oversee are afraid to tell them the truth. We should not be afraid to tell someone the truth. And even, our colleagues should have access to be able to tell us the truth. We may not always agree with them, and they may not always agree with us, but it's wisdom to sometimes consider what another person is saying, even if what they're saying is making you just a little bit uncomfortable. So in this case, we find that the egos are stirring. Nabal's ego was about to get him and his entire house taken out. And David's ego, that got offended, is about to take out a fool. And so Abigail has got to do something. And sometimes we need those intercessors. Sometimes we need someone to intervene. Sometimes we need a little bit of wisdom. Sometimes that little bit of wisdom before we go off and do something stupid is to pause, take a breath, and ask ourselves the question, is it worth it? Pause, take a breath, and reevaluate what should be the appropriate response to this threatening situation. The one thing we can see that's very clear here, one bit of truth that comes out when you got these egos stirring, don't let your mouth get you in trouble. Don't let your mouth get you in trouble. And that's important to know. That sometimes, it's one thing to have a slip of the lip. But what we see exhibited in the life and in the characteristics of Nabal, he was constantly always spurting off at the mouth, saying things that were just upsetting to other people and threatening. It's right there in the scripture. And we can see that those kind of egos can get people in trouble. It's that kind of wordsmithing back and forth to where you say this and they say that. Tit for tat, back and forth. And what happens, nobody gets anywhere and everybody gets upset. Let's go to the next slide. Things that make for peace. Verse 18. Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loaded them on donkeys and said to her young men, "Go ahead of me, and I'm coming after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David said, "Surely it was in vain that I protected all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. But he has returned me evil for good." God do so to David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. Oh no. What we see here, it's about to go down. He had already made up in his mind that he is going to wipe out every male that was a part, even probably the same men that he protected. He going to wipe them out too. So Abigail, we find in this text, she's scurries to make peace with David, while David is set on making war with the house of Nabal. Let me say this, and here we find the gospel truth. Here we find the words of Jesus. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. What we find here in the character and nature of Abigail, in the midst of two infused egos, we find a peacemaker, someone that's able to come in and to say the right things at the right time in hopes of getting a positive result. Because really, as we can see, we're about to see here, things are up in the air. It's up for grabs. So we're going to see what happens here. Verse 23 says, "When Abigail saw David, she hurried and alighted from the donkey and fell before David on her face, bowing to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, 'Upon me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant.' 25, "My lord, do not take seriously this ill-natured fellow, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent." Now let me say something. You can go and look up in your Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. You can go and look up any commentary. But the name Nabal, wherever you look, it means fool. So she said, as his name is, so is he. She said, he's a fool. Now, my mama told me something years ago when I was a little boy. She said, when you find a fool, you leave him a fool. Sometimes it's not worth your time to try to correct a fool. In fact, the book of Proverbs tell you about trying to correct a fool. It's to no avail. But we do learn something on how to talk away a situation that could be virtually hazardous to those who are in the context. Proverbs 15:15 says, "A soft answer turns away wrath." So we can see that she was discerning how to win the battle that was right there in front of her. She was the hidden figure that we see here that turned the tides of disaster and turned it into a situation of opportunity for peace and blessedness, all because of a soft answer. Colossians 4:6 says, "Let your words be seasoned with salt, Let's read that. I'm going to read it. 4:6 says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer everyone. Now that puts in check just to say anything off the cuff or say anything that comes out of your mouth. You got to think about what you're going to say to maybe an opposing party, or maybe someone that's getting on your nerves, or maybe someone you don't necessarily agree with, either their political position or spiritual ideas or whatever the case it might be. You just can't open up your mouth and just say anything. Not as a Christ follower. I'm just keeping it real. The word says, let your words be seasoned with salt. It's important to allow your words to minister grace to those that have your attention. And if my words cannot minister grace to those that have my attention, maybe I shouldn't say it. Maybe I should just keep my mouth shut. Remember, we want to preserve ourselves from allowing our mouth to get us in trouble. But I want to point out what we can see exhibited not only in the words that we see shared by Abigail, but there is a kind of wisdom that we're going to see as well on the next slide. But before we go to the next slide, I want to read a story out of the Gospels that exhibits what's about to take place. And in Luke 14, verse 31 through 32, it says these words. And he says, what king going out to wage war against another king will not sit down first and consider whether he's able with 10,000 to oppose one who comes against him with 20,000. 32, if he cannot, then, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So we're going to see if what is about to take place is exhibited by Abigail. Let's turn to the next slide. And let's look at the wisdom that is flowing out of this vessel. Beginning at 26. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, since the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and taken vengeance with your own hands, now let your enemies and those who seek to do you evil, to my Lord, be like Nabal. Now wait a minute now. Just think back for a moment. She had already sent this peace offering, and she told her servants that I'm going to show up later. So they got the goods. See the timing? She sent the goods first, so they can partake of the goods, so they can relish in the goods. But she timed when she would show up so that it would give credence and support for what she was about to say. Let me read it again. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live. So she's a person of faith. Since the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from taking vengeance with your own hands, now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord, which is David, be like Nabal. Verse 27. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. 28. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make the Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. 29. If anyone should rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living under the care of the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as with the hollow of a sling. When the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that has been spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or having saved himself. And when the Lord has dealt with you, my Lord, then remember your servant. Now look at the wisdom that's flowing out of this vessel. Apparently she knew who David was, because in her discourse, she talked about a sling. And we know that David had a history with the slingshot. And she said that the enemies, that the Lord God was going to deal with those enemies that have taken aught against him. And she said that when you become Prince of Israel, look at that. It was like she was prophesying where his outcome is going to be. Sometimes the words of wisdom come out prophetically that speak to where we're going to be in the future. And sometimes words of caution preserve my future, because I won't make a fool of myself. I won't turn and become a Nabal as the one that he's about or was about to take out. And then she says, and when the Lord has dealt well with you, remember your servant. In other words, when you come into your kingdom, don't forget about me. Let's see in verse 32. Good sense kept him from killing a fool. David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to me today. She became a sent one. She became an emissary. She, in essence, was a type of emissary that brought about peace. Blessed be your good sense, and blessed be you who have kept me today from blood guilt and from avenging my own self by my own hand. Yeah, he could have took him out, but because of the good sense of Abigail, it was able to help him to keep himself in check. 34, for as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there would not have been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received her hand and what she brought to him, and said to her, go up to your house in peace. See, I have heeded your voice, and I have granted your petition. Let's read on. Some things will take care of themselves. So now David has changed his mind. David has received words of wisdom. David has submitted his battle to the context of wisdom, to the category of good sense. Some battles are won by simply regarding good sense. Verse 36. Abigail came to Nabal. He was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all, until the morning light. She wanted to wait and ensure that he was clear-headed and that hangover was gone. And in the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has judged the case of Nabal's insult to me, and has kept back his servant from evil. The Lord has returned the evil doing of Nabal upon his own head." Then David sent and wooed Abigail to make her his wife. Boy, it's very clear. Nabal didn't realize the wisdom that he had walking beside him. David did, and so he wooed Abigail to be his wife. He wanted to have that kind of wisdom alongside of him to advise him, to guide him, to be a solace for him, especially when it comes to things like this. She proved that she was worthy to be a princess. And so we read here, verse 40, when David's servants came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to take you to him as his wife." She arose and bowed to him with her face to the ground and said, "Your servant is a slave to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." Abigail got up hurriedly, rode away on a donkey. Her 5 maids attended her, and she went after the messengers of David and became his wife. Now let's look at some takeaways in this part 2. I'm sure there's some other things that may have come to your mind as we were going through this story. But let's find out a few things that we can take away that we can add to our own life or reflect upon maybe for a future time. The hidden figures in this story is displayed in the character of 2 people, David and Abigail. And what we learn in this story is, whose battle is it anyway? He could have consumed upon his own flesh by taking things and taking matters into his own hand. But he didn't. He chose not to because he listened to sound advice. Discern the significance of which battle to fight. Some things you will have to allow them to play out. Sometimes retaliation can do more harm than good. In this case, the best thing to do was for David to do nothing, and the matter corrected itself. Sometimes when we put our hands on stuff, we just mess it up. Sometimes we just need to just be wise enough to know, you know what? This is not worth it. I'm not going to put my hands on it, and it'll take care of itself. Third point, remember the Nabal factor. Why kill a fool when you're destined to be king? And here's one. It's a kind of play on words. What is the opposite of Nabal? And that is reasonable. Clearly, Abigail's husband was not reasonable at all. Don't waste your debating with a fool. Some people are not worthy of your attention that you give them. It is better to walk away than regret it another day. Here's one. You don't have to prove every point when you know you're right. And that's a problem we have today. Sometimes our ego gets in the way when we know we're right and we're trying to prove a point. So it becomes tit for tat, becomes a battle, becomes unnecessary wrangling and unnecessary use of energy. You can use that energy somewhere else. You don't have to prove every point when you know you're right. Number 7, uncovered blessings are hidden through personal restraint. By him holding himself back, David. The blessing was in the form of Abigail. If he had wiped all of them out, he would have killed her too. And he would never have gotten the honor, never have learned, he would have blood guilt on his hand because he killed someone that he really shouldn't have. And then the last point, truly good things come to them that wait. Well, I trust that this part 2 of Hidden Figures was one that was informative, one that's insightful. I would encourage you to read the story again on your own. Maybe there's a hidden figure. Maybe there is a truth that's there that you hadn't saw before. Well, I trust again that you're blessed. We'll see you again next week here on Talking Points.